Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Vivian Ducat. I'm interested in your mom. She was an artist, and the movie is about an artist. What was that like for you to did you have any experience of anything familiar to you, or was anything about the fact that your mom was an artist and Winfred is an artist that kind of brought the film to life for you?
It made it very hard. I mean, there's a real insecurity that was very familiar to me in the personality of my mother about her artwork and whether she was being taken seriously. And Winfred has a lot of that vibe, or it's getting better as the film gets out there and as he gets known. But I felt like I had known him. I also felt like my mother was wanted to get into a gallery, and even though her stuff has shown and it did sell, she would have died to be in the gallery, the Adelson galleries where Winfred was. I mean, she was into American artists like Mary Cassatt and Maurice Prendergast, and that's exactly the gallery, the Adelson gallery shows those people. And she would have, the idea that I ended up making a film about a man whose work was there is wild. I mean, I sort of had my own demons in the middle of the night of arguing with her, and I wasn't allowed to be an artist. It was another whole sort of thing in my childhood. And so it's one thing to say I've made a television movie or my company's been hired to make XY project for a museum, but to sort of do something that is neither, it's not an assignment, it was something that I sort of made happen, that was kind of going against the rules in which I was raised. And it's more like being an artist doing it. And I felt like I was, even though she passed away in 2007, I was still having arguments in the midst of this film with the ghost of my mother.
Yeah, I can only imagine, because that was the other thing I was thinking. This is really your baby, your creation.
Well, together with my husband, the co-producer, together with the editor, who is also a second co-producer, who's really wonderful, Mike Solba, together with the cameraman, whose parents actually live in this area, together. I mean, all these things. I mean, I wouldn't do this if it weren't, a group activity. I have done some writing, and I don't like the loneliness. I really don't like doing things like that on my own. And what I love about making films is that you're always part of this group of people, and there's a sort of shared jokes, and there's a shared sense of knowing these characters together. And we send emails like, you wouldn't believe what Winfred did when we were showing it here, or something. There's always, there's just always, and that's what I think is fun.
What's it like to be a female filmmaker, and what has that been like for you over the years?
I knew a lot of women when I was much younger, when I was in my 20s, who seemed to spend their entire lives going to really interesting places and be single and never to be home long enough to form any kinds of relationships. And I was raised to be interesting. That was sort of like the dictum that I got. And once I found this film thing, I thought this fit being interesting. But then I began to be very afraid that I was always going to be alone. And not that I ever particularly, in my mind, until I did wanted to get married or have kids, that was something that I did much later in life. It was just the idea of, coming home from a trip and having no one to call on the phone. Mm-hmm. And so as I went on the road more and more and moved to England and worked there, everybody that I worked for was male. Everyone had somebody who kept a family going while they were away. And I wondered sort of, I spent 20 years basically living out of a suitcase, going on these trips. There were more budgets then. You'd spend 3 weeks on the road researching something. You might go back and meet people again to make sure they were warm enough on camera, and then you would go on at least another 3-week trip in order to film them. And it seemed like, was I really going to have to trade off one kind of life with another? And I'm very lucky that I didn't, and that I've gotten it all. And it's funny because in this film, as we go on the road with this film, I'm with an entourage of my family as opposed to with a camera crew that I've just met or whatever. So I am actually getting it all with making this film. And I made this film together. My husband and I made one other film together when my older son, who's 17, was a baby. We made a film for the American Experience called Hawaii's Last Queen, and we brought around this 3-month-old baby who then we went back and he was an 8-month-old baby. And having to be a mother and make a film at the same time, I found really hard. And a new mother and make a film. But, I've learned how to do all of that. And so I was, the last several years, I've done a lot of short films and a lot of museum media. And part of doing that was trying to not spend my life on the road. But once I met Winfred and this film happened, there was no way I was not going to do this film. And yet it was sort of breaking all these rules for myself that I had made, that I was no longer going to live that kind of life. So in that sense, it was hard because we did have to leave our children behind for some of the shooting, and it was not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a struggle for so many women. And as a filmmaker, I mean, this is very exciting that they get to come. They're here today at the studio, which is lovely. But did you have any mentors growing up, or you studied film in London, is that right?
I studied film at the BBC. I didn't study film in college. I've never had full mentors. There were men who definitely were sort of I worked with and whose ways I followed. I felt that after a certain while with most men, I threatened them, and they didn't get the same kind of joy from me that they get from other young. When men mentor younger men, they get a certain kind of joy on helping their career go farther. I feel like men don't have that helping women go farther, or not me at least. And so at some point I would always sort of break off or be broken off from whoever I had been working for. And so to that extent, I never felt really like I was mentored. And I had to figure it out on my own. But so is producing, figuring it out. No film is like the next one. And you have to know. One guy that I worked with, Bill Cran, who's a British producer, said, even though he's originally Australian, said to me, you know, Viv, your instincts are good, go with them. And that has stayed with me. And so whenever I think something, rather than squelch it, I hear that voice telling me that, and I do that. And that, one 2-sentence thing has been perhaps sort of like a mantra that I've kept with me.
So if you had to mentor other women, what would you say to them, or what advice would you give to them to become filmmakers?
So maybe I would tell them not to be filmmakers. It's a hard life. It's an interesting life and a hard life. I would say, trust yourself, and, try. If no one else is going to tell you what to do, so you need to sort of have a feeling that you know what you're doing, and be guided by your own sensibilities. I mean, I had the film coming back after shooting this and having the editing room say, you don't have enough material for a feature here, and the cameraman saying to me, I think we should do verite. I should go live with the Remberts for a week. It was like, no, I don't want a verite film. You're not going to live with the Remberts for a week. I mean, there was a sense of everybody having their own opinion and having to think, no, I'm in charge. I'll make the decision as to what we're going to do with this. And you take the advice of people, but you don't have to listen to them fully. Winfred, by the way, is a kind of old-fashioned man. Being his daughter is not the easiest thing in the world, as I've come to learn from speaking to his 2 daughters. So it wasn't the easiest thing to be a female director working with him either. I teased him when we showed him the short film, and he burst into tears. He loved it. When the one for the gallery, I said, and I assume that you think that Mike, the editor, and Dave, the cameraman, did this all on their own, don't you? I just had to.
I love it. My favorite part of the movie was how at the beginning he was talking about the Wilson brothers, the brothers who said to his mama that raised him, he's never going to be anything, is he? And she very politely said, to not make waves, no, he's not. And then at the end to have him be somebody in his own town. It was so moving. And I just wonder what obstacles, we've all had obstacles, but what have been the obstacles that you've had to overcome?
Where? I mean, when? How?
I'd like to know both in life and in filmmaking, but either one is fine.
I mean, in life, it was always this issue of growing up on the 14th floor of an apartment building in Manhattan and being terrified that I was going to be limited and provincial the way people I felt around me were, that New York is not the center of the world. And how could I have a life that took me somewhere else? I was on a traveling circus. I've done all kinds of things. And I was partially motivated by not being being from New York and not sort of seeing what the world was like, which is, at some point I used to say that I wanted to see what the world was like, in the middle of the day in as many places at the same time as possible.
That's a neat idea.
Yeah. In terms of filmmaking, it's just the sense that there's a very limited world of opportunities. And I got to a point, which is why I went into doing also museum media and touchscreen kiosks and all of that. I began to realize that there were, there have to be other things to do that are related. When I started in television, people said, broadcast is everything. It has to be broadcast or it doesn't count. And I came to realize that that's nonsense, and that, in fact, there are very different ways of reaching people and educating people and having those kind of experiences myself. And once I could own that, I stopped being so anxious about the few slots on public television or gigs in England that I would have to move back for that were the opportunities, and that, in fact, there are other opportunities. And I think that that's one of the best things of the last decade, in fact, that people who make content, as it's now called, the capital K, that, there are more places for us to work than just making long format films for television.
And if you had a secret to living a happy and successful life, what would it be?
Oh, making jokes. I think, seeing the lighter side of things and opting for that which is interesting. I think that path has been the best path.
Well, you are very interesting, and your film is amazingly interesting, and I am very grateful that you came to be with me on the red couch.
Oh, thank you. It's been very comfortable.
All Me, The Life and Times of Winfred Rembert is also been released by Snag Films on video on demand. For more information, you can visit www.allmethemovie.com. Thank you for joining us
On the red couch.